to cut off his extreme Republicans that refuse to support even the plan that he crafted to meet their reckless demands. The Reid plan is our best route to a compromise. It's a compromise we need soon before the markets render a truly ominous judgment that will set our economy back for years. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Illinois.
Madam President, I want to thank my colleague from New York, Senator Schumer, as well as Senator Mikulski from Maryland, for coming to the floor this morning and speaking about the crisis that we face. The debt ceiling default, which will occur in 6 days if we do not act, will have a profound negative impact on America's standing in the world and our economy at home. It threatens to stifle job creation and to slow down the business growth that we need to get out of this recession. It is the most serious impact you can imagine at a time when we are facing this kind of recession. This debt ceiling is being extended, or should be extended, under a law that was passed in 1939, where we have extended the debt ceiling 89 different times, 55 times under Republican presidents, 34 times under Democratic presidents, and virtually every president has done it. The president that holds the record for the most debt ceiling extensions in history is Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan extended the debt ceiling 18 times in his 8 years, during that period of time tripling the national debt. The president who holds the next record is President George W. Bush, who doubled the national debt in his 8 years, excuse me, and raised the debt ceiling 9 times. This should have been done and done routinely. Many of the members of Congress, House and Senate, who've come to the floor and said we will never vote to extend the debt ceiling, I think are not being honest with the American people. The debt ceiling is paying for things these congressmen and senators voted for. They came to the floor and said, let's go to war. Let's stay in war. Let's spend $10 billion a month. And the president said that was Congress's decision. Now I have to borrow the money to keep that promise. And these members of Congress are saying, oh, no, we don't want to have any fingerprints on the debt ceiling extension. You can't have it both ways. Members of Congress cannot ask for spending and then fault the president when he has to borrow money to make it happen. And that's exactly what they're doing. The president has tried to work out a bipartisan agreement to deal with this debt ceiling crisis. He invited in Republicans and Democratic leaders with Vice President Biden to sit down and work out an agreement, a bipartisan agreement. About 4 weeks ago, the House Republican Majority Leader Eric Cantor of Virginia stood up and walked out. He said, I'm walking away from these bipartisan negotiations. I'm not going to be party to them. Leave it up to Speaker Boehner. Speaker Boehner then went in negotiations with President Obama, talking behind the scenes about ways to resolve this. That was a positive thing. But then he announced he was walking away from the negotiations, not once but twice, most recently last Friday. Monday night, television sets around America are tuned in as the President of the United States explains this crisis, and then Speaker Boehner explains his point of view. Speaker Boehner said Monday night he had a plan that would solve this crisis in a responsible way. That was Monday night. But then came Tuesday, and as the dawn came on Tuesday morning, and people took a close look at the Boehner plan, here's what they found. They found that business leaders across America were saying it was a terrible idea. The idea of a 6-month extension to the debt ceiling and going through this mess again and again would harm our economy. And then the Congressional Budget Office took a look at the Boehner plan that he talked about Monday night and said it doesn't add up. It doesn't cut the spending that Speaker Boehner said it would. And then finally, 100 members of Speaker Boehner's Republican caucus walked out on him yesterday, saying it was a bad plan. So here we are, 6 days away from a deadline, 6 days away from a manufactured political crisis. It's time to do the right thing. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid has a proposal which addresses this responsibly. It cuts spending, and it's already been scored, has it not, by the Congressional Budget Office. And it turns out that unlike Speaker Boehner's plan, Senator Majority Leader Harry Reid's plan does in fact cut spending to move us toward a balanced situation. Secondly, It extends this debate beyond the next election, beyond the next year, so that we don't put our fragile and weak economy through this again and again and again. That's a sensible thing. It also calls for the creation of a joint committee to deal with the long-term deficit. I've been involved in this conversation with the Deficit Commission, again with the Gang of Six. We can do this on a bipartisan basis if we are honest and open with one another, and Majority Leader Reid leads us in that direction. And so, Madam President, we face a deadline 6 days from today. The Boehner Plan of Monday night has disintegrated before our eyes. It has been rejected by business leaders. It has been rejected by the Congressional Budget Office. It's been rejected by the House Republican caucus. It is time for a little humility on both sides of the aisle from both parties. Let's put all this squabbling aside. Let's focus on America's economy, putting people to work, saving businesses, and handling our debt in a responsible way. We can do it. We can do it if we stop listening to the political extremists and start dealing with the center of America, which calls for leadership and wants us to put an end to the squabbling. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Majority Leader.
I have 8 unanimous consent requests here for committees to meet. These have been approved by both majority and minority leaders. So I ask consent that these requests be agreed to and be printed in the record.
Without objection.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to executive session to consider calendar number 194.
Clerk will report.
Nomination, Department of State. Gary Locke of Washington to be Ambassador of the United States of America to the People's Republic of China.
Madam President, I ask that nomination be confirmed, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid on the table. There be no intervening action or debate, no further motion be in order to the nomination. That any statements related to the nomination be printed in the record, that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate then resume the legislative session.
Is there an objection? Without objection.
Madam President.
Senator from Arizona.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Additional time if necessary.
Without objection.
Madam President, as the Senator from Illinois just pointed out, today we are 6 days away from a possible default which could plunge this country into a serious crisis. In fact, there are some who view that maybe it's not exactly 6 days, it could be a few days more. There are those that argue somehow, in a bizarre fashion, that somehow we could prioritize our payments to the most urgent requirements, such as our veterans, such as Social Security, others. I wonder if the Greek government came up with that same proposal as they went into bankruptcy, that they would prioritize spending that's remaining. But the point is today we are 6 days away. The point is the markets are jittery, investors are concerned, and most importantly, our constituents are frustrated, they're confused, and they're angry. Today on the front page of USA Today, there's a headline that says, "The Debt. What Americans Think About the Political Debate." And it goes on to say, just get it done, work it out. Another person says, "I'm sick of it," says Davis, 73, a retired economist. Quote, "They're playing games. Here we are trying to pull ourselves out of recession, and they can't come to an agreement." If anyone thinks that the reputation and the approval rating of Congress and the presidency has improved because during this situation that we find ourselves in, then obviously they are out of touch with their constituents and the American people. Not only are the American people concerned, not only are the American people upset, but I quote and ask to be made part of the record an article from this morning's paper, Washington Post, that says, "Frustrated executives say political impasse slows hiring and investing. Business leaders are growing exasperated with Washington, and they say the dysfunction in the political system is holding them back from hiring and investing. So where we are is average American citizens are worried. Social Security recipients who are entitled are calling our offices, and the markets are already jittery. Most economists believe that if we allow this deadline to pass, that we will see a cratering of the financial markets, which obviously has significant impact on savings, on people's holdings in the stock market, 401ks, et cetera. And meanwhile, here we are with a situation that over on the other side of the Capitol, our Republican friends are trying to come up with a proposal that will receive the support of their majority. And over here, we have individuals who believe somehow that there is still a chance, at least in this Congress, to pass a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. Now, I will take backseat to none in my support of the balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. 13 times I have voted for it. I will vote for it tomorrow. But what is really amazing about this is that some members are believing that we can pass a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution in this body with its present representation, and that is foolish. That is worse than foolish. That is deceiving many of our constituents by telling them that just because the majority leader tabled the balanced budget amendment legislation, that somehow through amending and debate, we could somehow convince a majority on the other side of the aisle to go along with the balanced budget amendment of the Constitution. That is not fair. That is not fair to the American people. To hold out and say we won't agree to raising the debt limit until we pass a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. It's unfair. It's bizarro. And maybe some people who have only been in this body for 6 or 7 months or so really believe that. Others know better. Others know better. I am confident, one, someday we will pass a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. I am confident that the overwhelming majority of the American people support it. 3, and I am convinced that that is the only way that at the end of the day we will get spending under control, because I have seen in the past Congress enacting very strong restrictions on spending, such as the Gramm-Rudman legislation, which required spending cuts with increases in spending, and all of them failed because Congresses cannot bind future Congresses. And that's why I remain committed to a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. But to somehow think or tell our citizens that if we have enough debate and amendment here in the Senate in the short term, in the next 6 days, that we will pass a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution is unfair to our constituents. It's unfair to our constituents, frankly, to come up with a plan, the so-called Reid plan, that is full of smoke and mirrors and, frankly, does not entail any increase, real spending cuts. It's unfair of the President of the United States to lead from behind. It's unfair of the President of the United States not to come forward with a specific plan that perhaps could be considered by both bodies, but only to go out and give lectures and act in as partisan a fashion as I have seen in his addresses to the American people. So no wonder the American people's approval ratings of the President and of Congress are literally at all-time lows. So I want to talk for just a second, for a minute, about a editorial in the Wall Street Journal this morning. The Wall Street Journal is not known to be, especially on its editorial page, a liberal periodical. It's entitled The GOP's Reality Test. It talks about the debt limit is heading toward a culmination with President Obama reduced to pleading for the public to support a tax increase, and Speaker John Boehner and Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid releasing competing plans that are the next to last realistic options. The question now is whether House Republicans are going to help Mr. Boehner achieve significant progress or, in the name of the unachievable, hand Mr. Obama a victory. Mr. Obama recognizes these stakes, threatening yesterday to veto the Boehner plan in a tactical move to block any Democratic support. And it goes on and talks about, this editorial, about the two-phase Boehner plan. Congress would authorize $1 trillion in new debt, return for $1.2 trillion. It has since been scored by the CBO, and now I believe that on the House side they are struggling, and I hope will succeed in coming up with a proposal that will authorize the cuts that we have advertised. But I go on to read, again, unless the plan passed, Mr. Obama couldn't request the additional $1.6 trillion debt ceiling increase that he would soon need. The political incentive is for a reasonable package, and many Senate Democrats also don't want to vote for tax increases before 2012. It talks about the critics, about people putting out statements, telling Republicans, telling the Speaker to come up with a better solution. The usually sensible Club for Growth and Heritage Action, the political arm of the Heritage Foundation, are scoring a vote for the Boehner plan as negative on similar grounds. But what none of these critics have is an alternative strategy. None of these critics have an alternative strategy for achieving anything nearly as fiscally or politically beneficial as Mr. Boehner's plan. The idea seems to be that if the House GOP refuses to raise the debt ceiling, a default crisis or gradual government shutdown will ensue, and the public will turn en masse against Barack Obama. The Republican House that failed to raise the debt ceiling would somehow escape all the blame. Then Democrats would have no choice but to pass a balanced budget amendment and reform entitlements, and the Tea Party hobbits could return to Middle-earth, having defeated Mordor. This is the kind of crack political thinking that turned Sharon Angle and Christine O'Donnell into GOP Senate nominees. The reality is that the debt limit will be raised one way or another, and the only issue now is with how much fiscal reform and what political fallout. If the Boehner plan fails in the House, the advantage shifts to Mr. Reid's Senate plan, which would raise the debt ceiling by $2.4 trillion in one swoop through 2012. That would come without a tax increase, but also $2.7 trillion in mostly fake spending cuts, like less government waste, fraud, and abuse. How many times have we heard that we're going to cut waste, fraud, and abuse? And a $1 trillion savings from troop drawdowns in Iraq and Afghanistan that are already built into the baseline. As fiscal reform, this is worse than Mr. Boehner's plan. The Speaker has made mistakes in his debt negotiations, not least in trusting that Mr. Obama wants serious fiscal reforms. But thanks to the President's overreaching on taxes, Mr. Boehner now has the GOP position in sight of a political and policy victory. If his plan or something close to it becomes law, Democrats will have conceded more spending cuts than they thought possible, and without getting the GOP to raise taxes and without being able to blame Republicans for a debt limit crack-up or economic damage. If conservatives defeat the Boehner plan, they'll not only undermine their House majority, they'll go far to re-electing Mr. Obama and making the entitlement state that much harder to reform. Now, let me say again, I believe that the plan crafted by Senator McConnell that would call for significant cuts in spending, which would not have raises in taxes, would, in the short term, be a most reasonable solution. I hope that on both sides of the aisle we could work together and negotiate a way through that. But I also think the much derided by some idea of a committee composed of members of Congress only, from both sides of the aisle, from both sides of the Capitol, to sit down and work out a long-term solution to our fiscal calamities that we are facing, and those results and those recommendations by that committee be subject to an up or down vote only is the only way we can go. How many times have we had a budget resolution that tasked the various committees to come up with savings, and always those savings are phony or they are dismantled on the floor of the Senate? A only way that we are going to have the courage to make these cuts is with a committee composed of equal number of Republicans and Democrats on both sides of the Capitol who come up with tough measures that need to be taken. I believe that the American people will support it. And if it is not an up or down vote, we know what happens around here, and that, let's be honest, let's have some straight talk, the special interests prevail. And they would dismantle the tough provisions that this committee would come up with. And I say to my friends on this side of the aisle, this is a balanced Republican and Democrat. We only control 1/3 of the government, and that's the House of Representatives. So it seems to me a balanced, equal representation is to our advantage. I just want to say a word again about the Reid plan. And first of all, I congratulate the Majority Leader for coming up with a plan, because certainly the President hasn't. Spectrum auctions is part of it. That's going to provide auction of billions of dollars. I've been in this body for a considerable period of time. I can't tell you the number of times we have called for auctions of spectrum. It's an annual basis, a cop-out that prevents us from making tough decisions. Most egregiously, the Majority Leader's plan provides $1 billion to pay television broadcasters who return unused television broadcast spectrum. The television broadcasters got the spectrum for free. Now we're supposed to ask the taxpayers to give them $1 billion to give back the spectrum that they own? And then, very interestingly, savings in Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. $30 billion in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac reforms. There's nowhere in his proposal that mentions that, but I would point out that we've already spent $150 billion on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that we have never seen the end of. And then, of course, the large claim that there's $1 trillion in savings from winding down the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and of course that is phony. Everybody knows that we are winding down the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. So here we are, 6 days away. 6 days away, and we still have members of Congress who are saying we have to pass the balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. We have members on the other side who are saying that we have to raise taxes. We have a President of the United States who so far has refused to come forward with a detailed plan of his own. That's called leading from behind. It's time. It's time we listen to the markets. It's time we listen to our constituents. But most of all, it's time we listen to the American people and sit down and seriously negotiate something before we face a situation where people of the fundamental right of having a government that doesn't deprive them the essential services, goods, and entitlements which they have earned. Madam President, I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Minutes or so, and if I get within 2, if you'd let me know, I'd appreciate it.
Will do.
Probably won't. Thank you.
Without objection.
Madam President, I'm here today with a sense of optimism. I know that all of us are very concerned about what's happening in our country, the debt ceiling. I know we're getting lots of calls from constituents. But I want to say that I think we've made remarkable progress over the last couple of weeks. I mean, if you think about just a couple of weeks ago, people were crafting legislation for sort of a political vote, if you will, and I understand that. But here we are today. We actually have the leader of the United States Senate, a Democrat, who has proposed a bill that has to do with spending. The Republican leader of the House has introduced a bill that has to do with spending, and candidly, I'm kind of uplifted. I mean, we're finally on the right topic now, and you know, candidly, to use a colloquial term from Tennessee, you know, we're beginning to cook with gas. And what I mean by that is people are actually now focused on the right issue. Okay, so Madam President, I want to say that look, we've all talked about this August 2nd date. We've talked about the fact that you know, our debt ceiling has to be raised by then, and certainly there a lot of ambiguities in the financial markets right now. A lot of them have been watching the Treasury Department and think the Treasury Department has actually made some ways of causing that to last a little bit longer. But I think one thing we can all agree to in this body at present, we do have until August 2nd. I think everybody would agree that some people think we have longer. I think the one thing that almost everyone would agree with in this body, that we have until August 2nd to solve this problem, and I hope we'll do so. The other thing, Madam President, that's becoming part of sort of I think the mantra and the understanding throughout our country is that many of the financial markets, the people that actually buy our treasuries, they're now not as concerned about the debt ceiling. They want it raised, don't get me wrong. And I think, as I just mentioned, we all understand that August 2nd is a date that we have until to do that. But now they're more concerned about the fact that we may raise the debt ceiling and not actually do those things that we need to do to actually get our deficits in order. And many of them, first of all, we have the rating agencies that are saying that if we don't get at least $4 trillion in savings in some form or fashion, then some of them are going to downgrade us. But our office, I'm on the banking committee, our folks are constantly talking with folks who buy treasuries. The actual purchasers of these treasuries are now telling us in our office that if we don't do something that at least shows $4 trillion in savings, then they believe we don't have the political will to do those things to cause our country to be as worthy of a borrower, and that we're going to be paying more in the way of rates. So the second point I'd like to make, Madam President, is we have a proposal on the floor. I personally, and I may catch some grief back home for saying this, but I think Senator Reid has actually tried to put something forth to help solve this problem. I believe that, okay? And I think he's been working closely with Senator McConnell on that. I think Senator Boehner also, I know he has a different set of circumstances, is trying to solve this problem. But here's the point. We're at a place where we're now actually talking about the right topic, and we now know that if we don't put forth a solution that is at least $4 trillion in the order of magnitude, that we're going to be downgraded. It seems to me that people that on the other side of the aisle, my Democrat friends, would not want to support a proposal that extends the debt ceiling that is less than $4 trillion, because their president would be presiding over a country that was downgraded while he was president. And it seems to me that Republicans who've worked hard to press this issue, and everybody's gone through tremendous acrimony, and certainly people who are watching this are incredibly frustrated and angry. It seems to me that Republicans who are on the verge of potentially being able to craft something that actually solves this problem would not either want to support something that's less than $4 trillion. As a matter of fact, I would make this statement. I think it's true. Anybody that votes for a package in this body to address the debt ceiling and our deficit simultaneously that isn't of the order of magnitude that's real and scorable, those are two different definitions, real and scorable, of $4 trillion is actually voting for a package that likely causes our country to be downgraded. So here's what I would say. And we got Senator Reid, who's offered a proposal. They've scored it, I think, at like $800 billion. I know it says $3 trillion. His score's at about $800 billion. Senator Boehner has offered a package, and he, too, has had some scoring issues with his package. It seems to me that all of us in this body should be pressing the leaders on both sides of the aisle to at least present a scorable package that's scorable and real in the area of $4 trillion, or, depending on what you decided to do with that package, but if you voted for a package that was less than that, you'd be casting a vote to raise the debt ceiling, but at the same time probably cast our country into a situation where we're downgraded. And that doesn't make any sense to me. So Madam President, we have 6 days left. I know that people back home are nervous. I did a teletown hall last night. We had thousands of people on the call. People are angry that we've waited until this long to actually get serious about this issue. They're concerned about Social Security checks, disability checks, veterans checks. I understand that. I empathize with them. But we haven't quite finished our work. And we actually are on the right topic, finally. And, again, Senator Reid has offered a proposal. The House has offered a proposal. Neither one of them are strong enough. And Madam President, for what it's worth, I know you know this, but, look, I'm talking to people on both sides of the aisle, and people, I think, are reading what the markets are doing and becoming increasingly concerned about considering voting for a package. I know the presiding officer comes from the center of the universe as it relates to those kinds of issues, and people are rising up. There are a lot of private phone calls that are taking place, and people are saying, wait a minute, let's think about this. The markets, which matter, by the way, because they're the ones that buy our bonds, are now saying to us, they know we're going to deal with the debt ceiling, and I think we are. They know we're going to deal with the debt ceiling by the time we have to, and I think we are. But now they're beginning to think that we're not going to do something that's actually the real solution. So I'm here today to talk to my friends on both sides of the aisle to say, let's communicate with our leadership and say we've got 6 days left. We've got an opportunity to do something, we've all been saying this, that really does rise to the seminal moment, that we actually solve this problem. This is not a Republican issue. It's not a Democratic issue. It's something that is going to affect everybody in our country. And we're finally, after all of this time, focused on the right subject matter. I mean, we really are. And so I just met with a group of senators. I'm going to meet with another group of senators here in a little while. Let's make sure that our leadership, and let's make sure on both sides of this Capitol, understand that we believe that voting for a package that is less than $4 trillion in savings over this next decade, that's real and scorable, really isn't getting the job done. Now, Madam President, I would assume that I know that the Senator Reid's approach has been to do it all at once, and maybe there's a way to craft a package between now and next Tuesday that people can vote on that has $4 trillion in real savings. I think that might be difficult, but maybe something's happening behind closed doors that we're not aware of. I know that on the other side of the building, people are concerned about, well, actually, on the other side of the building, they're looking at a short-term extension. And I know the President has been concerned, candidly, about a short-term extension. In fairness, I think the business community around our country it would be concerned about a long short-term extension. In other words, one that carries out months and months and months, and we still don't have a solution to this problem. I understand that creates the kind of uncertainty that many of the people on my side of the aisle and, candidly, people on the other side of the aisle to some degree have talked about as it relates to the business environment. So, Madam President, sure, I'd love to vote for something that solves this problem and does it all on the front end, but I assume that our leadership, knowing the acrimony that's taking place, but again, at least we're on the right subject matter finally, the acrimony that's taking place, I assume that they have some really, really short-term extension in their back pocket, that to the extent we don't come to this conclusion by next Tuesday, they're ready to pull out, and they know that it's something that can actually pass both bodies. Madam President, again, I think we're so close now because we're finally focused on the right thing. I think we're close to getting to something that solves our country's problems for a while, causes people around the world and the country to know that we're actually willing, have the will, and have the courage to deal with these issues, and at the same time addresses the debt ceiling. Should we not quite get there by this Tuesday, and I know there's a lot of complications, and we have bodies that are made up of two very different groups of people, I would assume that our leadership, I mean, they understand what's at stake here, has in their back pocket a very short-term extension that could be used as a bridge to the kind of solution that maybe takes us to a place that we can all agree helps solve our country's problems. So, Madam President, again, I've heard that people have been coming down the floor back and forth and, you know, criticizing each side of the aisle. I'm actually more optimistic today. I'm not over the top, but I'm more hopeful than I was 2 weeks ago when we weren't even focused on the right issues, at that time focused on casting blame. And now what we have is both bodies looking at packages to actually address the deficit that we have before us. So, Madam President, I hope that people on both sides of the aisle will talk to leadership, will let them know that they have no desire to support something that doesn't solve the problem with all that we've gone through as a country and as a body over the course of the last couple of months. And I'm hopeful that we'll figure out a solution that actually meets that test, in other words, avoids the crisis on Tuesday, and at the same time avoids the crisis that will occur if people look at our country as a downgraded entity because we haven't shown that we're willing to at least deal with $4 trillion. Now, you know, I think most people know I'd like to do a lot more than that, and I offered a bill that was bipartisan that did a lot more than that. But I think we all now know that baked into the expectations about where our country is today is the fact that it's got to be a minimum of $4 trillion. And I think a lot of people have worked towards that goal. To even set up a process that's short of that doesn't make any sense to me. It's kind of like, you've got to be kidding me. We're going to go through the aggravation of the next 6 months working towards an aspirational goal that we all know doesn't solve the credit rating issue. So with that, Madam President, I thank you for the time. I yield the floor. I hope that we come to a successful conclusion soon. I stand ready and am talking with people on both sides of the aisle to try to come up with a solution so that we either solve this on the front end or put in place a process, a very quick process, that takes us to a place that we know we've actually dealt with the problem. With that, I yield the floor. Madam President, I notice the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Minnesota.
Madam President, I had asked that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise today to discuss the urgent need to raise the debt limit. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind my colleagues of our obligation to represent our constituents' best interests and those of our great nation. For at this late hour, with the deadline for an agreement fast approaching, the consequences of inaction are clear. They've been made clear by economists. They've been made clear by credit rating agencies. They've been made clear by the Federal Reserve and by our Treasury Secretary. And they've been made clear by respected leaders on each side of the aisle. And soon, if we do not act, they will be made clear by the market itself. I keep hearing from some members talk about the August 2nd deadline as if it's no big deal. They say they have their own theories.
about when the real deadline is. That just leaves me dumbfounded. I, for one, am going to take the Treasury Secretary and virtually every economist at their word. We need a solution before August 2nd, or we risk economic catastrophe. There are some members who are essentially saying that the Treasury can prioritize payments to avoid default, that getting Social Security checks out shouldn't be a problem. I heard a Republican member of the House Budget Committee on public radio this past weekend say that the money for Social Security checks is in the trust fund. Well, yes, we have $2.6 trillion in assets in the trust fund, but they're all in Treasury securities, not cash. I find it just stunning that a member of Congress, let alone a member of the Budget Committee, would not understand the most basic functioning of our government. Now, if there is no debt limit increase, Treasury may be able to juggle payments to get Social Security checks out on August 3rd. And I'm sure they will do everything they can to do so. But August 3rd would be just day one of Treasury's improvised prioritization strategy. August 3rd is the date that about half of the Social Security checks go out. But we have another round scheduled to go out on August 10th, and another on the 17th, and another on the 24th. In fact, the Treasury sends out over 70 million checks a month. August 3rd is not the end of the problem. It is the beginning. About a month ago, the Bipartisan Policy Center briefed members of the House Republican caucus on the actual implications of the August 2nd deadline, what we could pay, what we couldn't pay. Jay Powell, the former Undersecretary of Treasury under President George H.W. Bush, presented at the briefing. He outlined his research on what is likely to happen on August 3rd. He suggests that in the month of August, we could pay our debt interest, Social Security checks, Medicare and Medicaid, vendors for defense projects, and unemployment insurance benefits. That's what we could pay. But no pay for active duty military. No benefits for veterans. No federal loans for low-income students about to head off to college in the fall. No Pell Grants. No federal government employees, including counterterrorism agents in the FBI, for example. No border agents. Now, before we default, we could have time to make this sign for all points of entry. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just a sample of things we definitely couldn't afford to do. We can take that down. That doesn't even address the global economic impacts of playing so close to the edge. The dollar would be devalued. Our credit rating would be downgraded. It would cost us much more to borrow and to pay the interest on our debt, and thus our debt would actually increase. More importantly, all adjustable interest rates would rise, including on credit cards and mortgages and student loans. New loans, of course, would be more expensive. And these impacts could have a legacy that dogs us for decades, if not centuries. This is serious business, and we shouldn't be testing this deadline. Yet that's exactly what some of my colleagues are doing. I worry that Republicans in the House are blind to research, deaf to reason, and are simply ignoring facts that are contrary to what they want to hear. Throughout this debate, conservative House Republicans have stood in the way of a deal, and we've offered them some pretty sweet deals, and they've walked away. They've treated the August 2nd deadline as an advisory, as optional. They suggest that the Treasury could figure something out to prevent a default. Now they're opposing Senator Reid's sensible deficit reduction plan because of how it calculates some of its savings. Specifically at issue is the Reid plan's $1 trillion in savings from winding down the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which Republicans are calling a budgetary gimmick, not real savings. Yet, the Ryan budget, which almost every House and Senate Republican voted for, counted the same cuts almost identically. So they say it's real savings in the Ryan plan, but fake savings in the Reid proposal. I'm sorry, but you can't have it both ways. Further, Senator Reid's plan is all cuts. I don't necessarily like that. It contains dollar-for-dollar spending cuts to match the debt ceiling increase. And as much as I don't like this aspect of it, it doesn't include any revenues. Even though a Washington Post ABC News poll says that 72% of the American public believes we should ask those making over $250,000 to pay more. 72%. But a cuts-only plan is what Republicans have been saying they want all along, and now we've given it to them. We have it out there. It's there. And all of the cuts in the Reid plan have been supported by Republicans in the past. So, we are presenting a plan that is all cuts, no revenue. And the pretense that they are using to reject it just doesn't pass the smell test. And according to CBO, it saves $1.3 trillion more in savings than the Boehner plan, such as it is. You know, I often hear Republicans say the corporations are sitting on trillions of dollars of cash instead of investing, expanding, and creating jobs because businesses are facing so much uncertainty. Well, Senator Reid's plan offers certainty. But suddenly, Republicans want a short-term deal, one that would very well put us in this same crisis again in 6 months. What kind of certainty is that? No, a short-term deal will not offer our businesses and markets the certainty that they need. And a short-term deal may very well induce a credit downgrade according to Standard & Poor's. Yet Republicans say they prefer a short-term deal over Senator Reid's plan, which would take us through the end of next year. I don't get it. It just sounds to me like they care more about politics and winning than they do about their constituents' well-being, about the prosperity and economic security of the nation. Their hardline and cavalier attitude is frankly dangerous, very, very dangerous. Playing fast and loose with the facts is reckless. The American people deserve better than this. We need to raise the debt ceiling now, and Leader Reid has shown us the way forward. I don't like all the cuts in this package, and I wish there were increases in revenue from those who can afford it. But I know we have to pass it because it will keep us from defaulting, and it will do so responsibly and sensibly. We owe it to the American people to pull back from the brink and pass the Reid plan so we can avert disaster. We owe it to our constituents, and we owe it to our children. Madam President, I yield the floor. I would